NASCAR rolls into Thunder Valley for Elimination Weekend here in the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs. Let's talk about who the favorites are, who might be under the radar just a bit, and my personal picks for the upcoming NASCAR Cup Series race at Bristol Motor Speedway. So we got all that and more in this episode of Fantasy Friday. So, as we do almost every single week here on Fantasy Friday, I have put the odds up over on the side of the screen for you guys. And if you look over there, there is a clear favorite, and I think it's pretty obvious to see why. Kyle Larson is already won a race in this round, so he's already guaranteed into the round of 12. He's got nothing to lose if he goes all out, tries to win this race by 25 seconds, which is next to impossible at Bristol. But, yeah, so he's got that. He also has the fact that historically he has been very good at this race, including winning it as a part of the Kyle Larson Redemption Tour back in 2021 when he won the championship off of his suspension. He won this race amidst all the controversy and chaos behind him between his teammate Chase Elliott and Kevin Harvick, causing a ton of trouble. So Kyle Larson, makes sense that he's the heavy favorite at plus 550 there. Then from there, it kind of falls off. And the one good thing I will say about this odds sheet, and I think this is actually fairly accurate, is that it is very evenly balanced amongst all the manufacturers. You've got 4 Chevys, 3 Toyotas, 3 Fords in this top 10. So very evenly spread out. You got Denny Hamlin, Christopher Bell, second and third, 2 very good short track racers. Denny Hamlin winning this race back in 2019. Christopher Bell winning the dirt race at this same facility earlier this year. Now, he hasn't won the concrete Bristol yet, but hey, you never know. Everybody's got to have a first win at this track eventually, probably. So maybe Christopher Bell, he's in a good car. Maybe his first win comes today. Or tomorrow, I mean, because Cup race is on Saturday. Then we go to William Byron. He's been one of the better short track racers and one of the better racers on the year so far. 5 wins. Hard to really argue against that pedigree, especially where he isn't currently locked in. He will need to make sure he avoids a catastrophic mistake, even though I think he may be safe despite a bad race, but you just don't want to put yourself in that position where something could happen. So William Byron, again, going to be looking for a solid day, protecting points, and having a good fantasy day. Looking back to this race a year ago, though, is where we get to our next driver on the list. Brad Keselowski. He dominated this race last year and looked like he was on track to get RFK their first win after bringing in Brad Keselowski as an owner. Ultimately, he had a tire let go near the end of the race, which ultimately derailed his day. So ultimately, Brad Keselowski didn't get the win, but he looked very strong 1 year ago. Wouldn't put it past him to have a similar day, and if that tire holds up this time, who knows? We could be talking about a Brad Keselowski victory here for the first time in what is literally years at this point. It's been almost 2 full years, I think, since his last points-paying win over back when he used to drive for Penske. So, obviously, hard to talk about last year's race without talking about his RFK teammate a little further down on the list in 9th position there. Chris Buescher. This started off what I would call the Winsanity run that Buescher has been on the last year and a half. I mean, really the last 365 days. He picked up 3 wins already this year at Michigan, Richmond being another short track, and Daytona. 3 very different tracks from Bristol. And he also was running top 2 at this race in the fall last year, and ultimately took advantage of the blown tire of his teammate to ultimately put himself in victory lane at Bristol, making it for 4 wins in a calendar year. Now, obviously, he's going to try and repeat that this week, but he doesn't necessarily need to because he's okay in points. Just needs to avoid a disaster. So, Chris Buescher, though, again, he could be a very solid pick, especially if you believe heavily in last year's results, the first year with the next-gen car at this racetrack. Kevin Harvick has been very good at this. Kevin Harvick's been very good at this racetrack. In fact, I believe this is still his most recent race victory back in 2020. I don't think he didn't win in 2021. He didn't win last year, so yeah, this may be the site of his most recent race victory, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, I mean, he's won at Bristol before. He's looked good again in that 2021 season. He was just behind Kyle Larson, and he was trying everything he could to try and win that one and just didn't have something for Larson. But honestly, at this point in the playoffs, if you can pick up a guy who can get a solid top 3 or 4 finish for you at a track that, especially for a guy who's been struggling, could be a good value pick there. Especially where the rest of the tracks in the playoffs aren't necessarily Harvick strong suits, aside from next week at Texas. Then you've got some other kind of just easy chip-in shots. You got Chase Elliott. He's been very good at Bristol a lot. He won the Bristol race in the pandemic, if I'm not mistaken. He was on pace for a second place finish before wiping out Joey Logano in the pandemic 500 at Bristol. Yeah. Kyle Busch, one of the winningest. In fact, I think he is the winningest driver. He's the winningest active driver at Bristol after his brother retired. I don't remember where he stood compared to Kurt, but he doesn't have to compare to Kurt right now because Kurt's not on the track. So Kyle Busch, the winningest active driver in the Cup Series at this racetrack, gonna try and pick up another win, try and get himself into that playoff conversation for round 2. Obviously, he's about 20-something points above, so he isn't necessarily struggling for points, but every little bit counts, and this is one of his best racetracks on the circuit. And then we already talked about Chris Buescher, so the last driver on this list over on the side that we have left to talk about is Martin Truex Jr. He has been on a roll at the short tracks as of lately. He's dominated Martinsville a couple of times. He's won Richmond. In fact, I believe he swept Richmond in, 2019? I think he swept both Richmond races. No, one of those years he swept both Richmond races. Might have been a different year, but yeah, so he has been doing very well at the short tracks. Yet Concrete Bristol has eluded him for a win. He won on the dirt in the Truck Series not too long ago, but obviously Dirt Bristol versus Concrete Bristol is a massive difference. So can we possibly see a win from Martin Truex Jr.? I think it's very possible. But where he is in points, he has to make up points. So he could be a very big boomer bust pick, but I wouldn't say it's a bad pick. He's run well at this track despite no wins. So again, very boomer bust pick. Might not be my cup of tea, but maybe he falls into what you guys are looking for your specific NASCAR fantasy lineups as we get ready for race 3 of the playoffs. Now let's go talk about some of the underdogs here for a minute. All right, so now over on this list, now I have a few of the specific underdogs that I've gone and picked out from the bottom half of the list. These guys are all 15th or worse in terms of placements on the odds list. So that's where I'm taking these odds from. There are a few guys above this that I will mention later, but I didn't feel like anything above 15th in terms of odds was really a dark horse. So for this section, we're going to talk about these guys. So starting off with Bubba Wallace, he had a catastrophic day last week at Kansas. Finishing 32nd, just not what he was looking for, and ultimately puts him behind the 8 ball coming into Bristol. He's got to make something happen. He hasn't necessarily looked great at Bristol in the past, but between his teammate Tyler Reddick having looked pretty good at this type of track in the past, and those Toyotas looking a lot faster recently, especially the 2311 Toyotas across a multitude of racetracks this year have looked better. But ultimately, I think he was definitely looking for a much better day last week than he is this week. Speaking of Toyota drivers hoping to learn from some teammates, you've got Ty Gibbs making his first start at Concrete Bristol. It's very hard for a rookie to conquer concrete Bristol in their first try. Many drivers have taken a lot of heartbreak to learn it. I mean, to go back to someone I mentioned earlier, Kurt Busch was awful at Bristol until he found himself sitting in the infield, unable to exit the racetrack because they hadn't built the tunnel underneath the track to get out of there. So he had to sit. Once he had to sit on the infield there, just kind of watching the rest of the race from the pit lane or from the garage. That made him be like, yeah, I'm going to make sure I get to the end of these things. So how will Ty Gibbs do in his first start at Bristol? It's hard to say, but I'd like to imagine that he may do something pretty impressive. Alex Bowman on this list, mainly because he's still looking for his first win of the year, but certainly doesn't rule him out as a potential to surprise here in the NASCAR playoffs as a non-playoff driver to potentially snag a win. A couple other drivers here. I'm going to just kind of go rapid fire real quick because I don't think these guys are necessarily the guy, but I wanted to mention them because they're driving for teams that I feel are very good and could bring the resources needed to perform here. So Daniel Suarez driving for Trackhouse. I think the Trackhouse Chevys are going to be good enough. I just don't know about Daniel Suarez on short tracks quite yet as to his ability to actually perform. Eric Jones, that team has been trending upward massively the last 2 weeks after Darlington and Kansas. So hopefully we'll figure out that one. And obviously the fact that his new teammate has now been announced, they don't really have much to hide in terms of trying to have anything going on behind the scenes that he can't really talk about. We know who his teammate next year is going to be. So then we got Eric Almirola and Chase Briscoe. They're two Stewart Haas drivers. Again, that team should be much better than it is, but Briscoe in particular is a better short track racer, so I wouldn't rule him out. But it's going to be tough just because that team has not been where they need to be. McDowell and Stenhouse, they're in must-win positions here going into this final race before the playoffs. So, again, big boomer bust because they need to win. And if they don't win, it'll be very tough for them to find their way into the next round. In fact, I think for McDowell, it may be impossible without a win for him to find his way into the next round of the playoffs. But I figured I'd mention them since they're both playoff drivers. Ryan Preece, another Stewart Haas guy, another short track experienced driver. But again, I think the equipment may be what holds him back. Carson Osavar, he's been looking very good in his limited starts here in the number 42 car. Sounds like he may be making starts in the NASCAR Xfinity or even the NASCAR Cup Series as a full-time option for next year. We'll have to wait and see where exactly he ends up landing. Sounds like possibly that Spire 77 car could be an option for him. So good luck to him. Hopefully this week he can put together a good campaign to basically audition for a good ride for next year. And then the last driver I just wanted to mention, mainly because he's a part-timer making limited starts, and I believe this might be his last start of the NASCAR Cup Series season. It's Ryan Newman, driving that number 51. He hasn't looked overly impressive in any races yet this year, but I only want to mention him because he's Ryan Newman. He is a short track specialist. In fact, that's the only reason he came back to the NASCAR part-time was because he was only going to do the short tracks. He didn't want to do the big tracks. He felt like he was good at the short tracks, and that was what he could excel at, and that's where he is. So, again, maybe not someone I would pick, but certainly not a terrible pick if you are really trying to save uses, although in the playoffs, you might be looking for something a little bit better than him. So, I'm going to go ahead and put together my lineup and talk about a few more, about probably 2 or 3 more drivers that I would maybe pick. Okay, so real quick, to wrap up this video, I've got 4 more drivers I want to talk about. 2 Penske drivers, Joey Logano and Ryan Blaney. They they weren't necessarily listed on either of the odds list, but the Penske Fords, they're part of that Ford camp that looked very good with the Roush Fenway last year, so maybe this year it'll be the Penske cars looking good. But I wouldn't probably waste a pick on them here. No, I think the Penske cars are going to be a much better bet at Talladega in a couple weeks, although maybe you'll have enough picks to use Blaney and or Logano here. But the Penske's looked good at Phoenix last year too, so again, just there might be better spots to use them, but I wouldn't say that they're an absolute no-brainer to skip here this week. And then the last two I want to mention is Ross Chastain, playoff driver, trying to get into the next round. He has a pretty decent short track resume. Well, pretty decent short track resume. Obviously, the Hail Melon last year to advance to the next round of the playoffs, and then you have obviously earlier this year he won his first shorter oval, winning Nashville with the same aero package we'll be racing at with this weekend on a similar concrete surface. So hopefully he'll perform similarly there. And then last week's race winner Tyler Reddick looking to try and go back-to-back to continue his dominance, but hard to really tell. But again, he's one of those drivers. He was good here with his previous team with RCR, and he's looked as good, if not better, at 23XI this year. So I'd say you're in pretty good hands with Tyler Reddick if you choose to pick him over some of these other guys to maybe save a use. But yeah. So now over on this side over here, I have got my actual lineup, so you guys can go ahead and take a look at the people I'm starting, maybe some of the people I mentioned that I'm going to be skipping. But yeah, ultimately, those are my picks. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you guys did, leave a like on the video. Subscribe if you guys are new so you guys don't miss any future videos or live streams. And of course, comment down below who you guys are going to be picking in your NASCAR Fantasy Live rosters this coming week. Of course, your roster may look very different from mine based on who you may or may not have already used this week. So, thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys next video, live stream, whatever you guys have to do with the rest of your day. Of course, I will be streaming the NASCAR Xfinity Series race later tonight on the on this YouTube channel. So hopefully you guys will tune in for that. But until next time, I'll see you guys later. Goodbye!